Welcome back to Telltale. Continuing to talk about H.P. Lovecraft. I haven't really been going in order with these, but I'm going to try to go back to the early ones that I haven't done yet and start working in order on reviewing everything that I've got by Lovecraft except for the poetry. Maybe I'll do another video on this, but I find his poetry to be less than interesting. Most of his poetry has nothing to do with horror or the fantastic. He only wrote a small amount of fantastic poetry. Most of it gets too political and tends to be extremely racist. That's where you see Lovecraft's attitudes really come through. You don't see that so much in his fiction. You see it a little bit in fictions, particularly in certain stories, but in most of his fiction you don't see much of that. You read his poetry and you're just bombarded with it. So I guess I would say for modern readers that Lovecraft's poetry is not worth taking the time to read through. Seek out his few fantastic poems and read those, and just skip the huge volume of other types of poetry that he wrote, because they're, even when he's not being racist or political, they're just not that good, in my opinion. I think connoisseurs of poetry would agree that he's pretty weak compared to, really famous poets. My favorites are, of course, Edgar Allan Poe and A.R. Ammons. I think they are great, great poets. Anyway, the point of this video is I've already done a review of The Alchemist, which is the earliest story that I can find by H.P. Lovecraft. And that one was written by H.P. Lovecraft. His second story, Lovecraft had kind of like a side job of rewriting people's work. Somebody that wanted to get their work published, he offered the service that they could send him the story or send him the outline, and he would help them with it. In some cases, he did a lot of the writing, so that scholars can tell you, yeah, this is like mostly H.P. Lovecraft. In other cases, he really just did tweaking to them, and so the stories have a lot of the other author in it too, but you can still see hints of Lovecraft. The first of these stories that I come across looking, into various bibliographies is called The Green Meadow, and it was a story that was written by a woman named Winifred V. Jackson, and H.P. Lovecraft wordsmith that story. Now this one, it's hard for me to say if it's more Lovecraft or more Jackson or kind of an equal combination, because the story actually feels a lot like something that William Hope Hodgson would have written. Reminds me a lot of The Voice in the Night or The Voice in the Dawn, which I recently read and have reviews coming on the channel in the next couple of weeks for Halloween season. It reminds me a lot of it in that there's a great deal of imagination, great deal of imaginative description, but no real climax, no real denouement to it. Just kind of, it's more like a dream of a far off place. The basic plot is that a meteor falls to Earth, and within this meteor they find a book. Don't ask me how the book survived coming through the Earth's atmosphere with all the heat. Never mind. It makes it, people pull the book out of the rock and they read it. It's the journal of a guy who supposedly sent the rock through with the book. He's an Earth person, but he wakes up one day in a strange land where he's definitely not on Earth. And he sees an ocean, he sees these tall trees, and he sees this green meadow. And he hears a piping music, and he can see something moving in the woods, and he tries to find them. He goes across the meadow and tries to find where the music is coming from. And like I say, you don't really get a resolution to this. You don't really get where they attack him or he attacks them or anything like that, or he joins their society. You don't really get that. You just get this dreamlike description of this really wild, imaginative place. It's an interesting story. I wouldn't put it up in my top tales. I don't think it quite qualifies for that, mainly because it's so short and doesn't really go anywhere. But it is very interesting. It's very imaginative. Like I say, it's very brief, so worth reading. I have the story and read the story in my copy of The Horror in the Museum. This is by Arkham House. This is not the original. I do love the illustration on the original editions of Arkham House. I love the illustration on this one also. Who did it? Raymond Bayless? This says Jacket by Raymond Bayless. Doesn't necessarily say that he's the illustrator. Yeah, there's nothing on the legal page either. So I love this illustration. I like the illustration on the original edition better, but here's the thing with everything Lovecraft from Arkham House. Lovecraft wrote stories. They got submitted to magazines. The editors changed them. And then when August Derleth went to put them into book publication in the 1940s, 50s, 60s, he rewrote everything too. So what you get in those original editions from Arkham House are not quite Lovecraft's original stories. Now in the 1980s, S.T. Joshi, I think that's how you pronounce his name, who is the world's foremost scholar of H.P. Lovecraft, he committed himself to a very long project of restoring the original texts. And so Arkham House reprinted all of their main H.P. Lovecraft collections with the restored text. So this edition is one of those. This is from the mid-1980s. Has all the restored texts. So in my opinion, this is really the preferred edition to get as far as wanting to read the true Lovecraft story. The other editions are valuable because they were printed in limited quantities and they're old and they're rare. To find one in really great shape, you're going to pay hundreds of dollars. That's the other downside of it, is if you're not rich, you're probably not going to be able to afford the original Arkham House H.P. Lovecraft books. You know, like try and get The Outsider and others. You're going to pay at least $3,000 currently for a decent copy of The Outsider and Others. But that one has such a cool cover by Virgil Finlay. Oh, I would love to just get a poster of the cover. Anyway, this is where I read it. This has, I believe, all of H.P. Lovecraft's collaborations are in this, including The Green Meadow. So it's a good book to get. And you can get this as an ebook. It's not that expensive as an ebook. Public domain situation with these stories, these being collaborations, you've got two people that held the copyright. H.P. Lovecraft, of course, no longer holds, H.P. Lovecraft in his estate no longer holds the copyright to those stories, but in many cases, the original authors and their estates still hold copyrights. Probably not the Green Meadow, because that was published in 1918, originally published in, well, it was originally published in Beyond the Wall of Sleep by Arkham House in 1943, but it was originally written by Lovecraft and Winifred Jackson in 1918. So it's hard to say with that one. The publication date, I think, is where the copyright comes from, and so 1943, that may still be copyrighted. So, might not find this one on Project Gutenberg, might not find it for free online, but like I say, you can get ebooks of this, of the horror in the museum, for less than $10. It's not bad. So, with that, like us and subscribe to us. Leave comments. What do you think of this story if you've read it? What do you think of the revision history of H.P. Lovecraft's work? Is that something that, do you prefer the original publication versions where they changed Lovecraft's work, or do you prefer that S.T. Joshi is going back to Lovecraft's originals as much as he can and trying to restore it all? Or tried, I believe he's done with that. And of course, come back next time for more. I'm going to be moving on the next story in publication order, or in this case, writing order, since Green Meadow wasn't published till the 40s. The next one is The Beast in the Cave. We'll be doing a review of that with, I believe I'm doing that with Emily, if she has time.